We have an extremely special guest, Lewis Castle, who is a titan of the video game industry and really part of the history of video game development, um, internationally and specifically here in Las Vegas, where we're based and this meetup is based. In the 80s, Lou Castle, along with his business partner Brett Sperry, founded what would go on to be called Westwood Studios. That would create the Command and Conquer series and change the RTS genre and create many, many great games before selling the company for an exorbitant amount of money to Electronic Arts and creating, I think, in its wake, an incredible landscape here in Las Vegas. Las Vegas is known for gaming, but it's always kind of has that casino gaming emphasis. And then Lou came in and did something that is more about the type of games that I think people in this call are inspired by. So we're going to delve into the history and anything else that you want to talk about, Lou, with your involvement with GDC and everything. So just again, thank you so much for being here and sharing your time with us. Um, I think, are going to go across the landscape of your career and advice and questions and your perspectives on how games have changed and technology has changed. You've seen so much change. Um, and a little bit what you're involved with now. But I guess to start, I would be curious to just learn, what inspired you originally to form a video game company to make games, and uh, were you going off of instinct? Did you have mentors? Was it just a complete wild west back then? Take us back to the 1980s when all this started.
Yeah, it was definitely the Wild West. It was a hobby business at that time. So my personal story. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's nice to be here, and I do appreciate it when people are interested in my career or things I can share, and hopefully um, I can share some things and make your lives a little easier. Maybe you won't make the same mistakes I do. I'm always finding new ones to make. So, I suppose it's always good to hear how other people did found good things to happen. So I started in high school. I was going to be an architect. I was quite certain of it. I had a fine arts background, did a lot of painting and drawing all my life. Did silly things around town like paint windows for Christmas and stuff like that as I was in high school. And I really wanted to be an architect. I took architecture classes, and in my junior year, ended up being quite successful at that. Had my houses being designed actually, or at least the house that I had designed being done by proper architects to be built. So I won a contest where they actually built the house that I had designed by the time I was in my senior year of high school. And I said about my father had always told me to go out and get ahead of the game, make sure you put in your application. So I had all my applications in for colleges, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to be an architect. That's what I'm going to do. But this funny thing happened along the way. I bought a computer back in probably 81 for earlier in high school. So I already had the computer, and I was messing around with it a lot. And I said, God, I think that at the end of the day, when I went to this conference at the old Rotunda, I think there's some. My goal was always, I always have a backup plan. I do recommend this. I always have a backup plan. There's always a plan A, plan B, plan Z. Down the road. I had the backup plan of if I couldn't be an architect, maybe I could be a draftsman no matter what. So I'd have a good job, and then at least it's something creative. At least it's something I can use some skill sets for. Didn't imagine how much computers would change, but I saw these computers being used to do drafting, and I thought, oh, there goes my plan B. Computers are going to be the plan B. So what if I learned how to use computers? Then that's still going to be my plan B. So by the time I ended up starting my senior year and took my very first computer programming class, over that summer, I had been already a programmer, and I'd already learned assembly language programming and such. And I taught my computer science teacher in high school how to program in assembly language over the summer. So as a job, and then he comes in, he goes, "What are you doing here?" And I go, "Well, I've never had a computer science class. So I have to have something on my resume if I want to get into computer science." Very long story short. There's a lot of details here, but ultimately, what got me into the industry was I started realizing that I liked making the computer graphics. As an artist, I thought, wow, if I could really have a perfect job, it would be to do artwork on computers. And I learned programming because back then, to make artwork on computers was very much a very laborious data-driven process. There wasn't a lot of tools for drawing or anything like that. So I used to draw on graph paper, and bubble in the blocks, and then hand encode it into hexadecimal and type it into data structures. That's how you'd get images on the screen. So very quickly, I started making tools that you could actually drop the pixels on the screen, and you would output those as printouts or as files. But to put you way back in the Wayback Machine, it was very different then. There was no medium to distribute things. So my first game that I published, I was a programmer as a hobbyist. I typed it in, and you publish the source code in a magazine. So the magazine published my very first. It was like a surround, like a snake surround game. Basically, it was called Squirm, and the magazine published that, gave me a couple $100. That was my very first published game in 1982. So 82, 83 is when I started looking at these careers, and I said, I think I just want to go to college and be fine arts and computer science. So I went to my dad. I said, hey, I got this full ride scholarship to ASU to be an architect, uh, and they're going to pay me. It's an apprenticeship, so I get paid to go work after school, and however much they contribute toward my education, I have to just pay it back afterward. But they already give me a job, or four-year commitment for a job. So basically, my life was all set. So I said, hey, Dad, how about instead I keep working at this computer store, selling computers, doing this custom programming stuff, which he really didn't even understand what that was, and made some graphics for kids games and stuff. And he does, and put myself through high school or through college at UNLV as a fine artist in computer science. So my dad's like, so, well, let me ask a couple questions. And I said, sure, because if you did this architecture thing, you went to school and you got your architecture degree and all that, would you still do computer games? And I go, oh yeah, it'd be my hobby. It was a lot of fun. I love tinkering with them. It's so much fun. Because, well, if you went to school and you got this job, or you did something where you could make money doing computer graphics things, whatever, would you still do architecture? And I go, yeah, no, probably not. That would satisfy my itch. And he goes, well, you know what you want to do. You're just asking permission. You should do what you want to do. Follow your own heart. So it was that insight that I suppose really set me on the right path, because I think I was looking for permission. Without permission, I would have followed the prescribed course and gone and become an architect. Maybe I'd be a great architect. Who knows? But that got me into computer games. Uh, I started working on games at the computer store. I started doing graphics for Brett's games. Actually, Brett was a customer at the store, and he started doing some games on the Apple. And he saw the artwork I was doing on the Apple. He said, "Wow, you're a really talented artist. Do you mind doing some of the artwork for my games?" I said, "No problem at all." And I learned how to do a lot more semi-language programming. And finally, we started working together for a couple of different computer companies, all while I was going to college as a dual major, fine arts and computer science, taking 16, 20 credit hours, still working at a computer store on the weekends, selling computers, and still doing custom programming, because my work with Brett just didn't pay very well, and I like to spend money. So, so we did all that for a while as his partners. And eventually by 1985, we had done a couple games together. I had done some programming, he had done some programming, and we got approached by Epics to make the first game. So I'll pause there and say that's how I kind of got into the industry as really a hobbyist. There was even a company called Out of the Blue, which was one of the guys who ended up being part of Westwood's history, had said he wanted to start a company and make computer games and sell them. Used to sell them at Aggies, by the way. That's the way you would sell computer games back then. Once you stopped doing once they got beyond the type it in a magazine, you would put them on cassette tapes using an acoustic coupler, and make these really funny noises like old modems that you've seen in television or movies. And you would put them in baggies and mail them to computer stores around the country. There was no centralized distribution for personal computer games. So that's actually where I started in the industry. So way before kind of I've seen it all. So, and I can answer a lot of questions about the stuff like I programmed our TRS-80s, Fortune 2000 systems, which were these Unix-based systems, CPM, sold Apple Lisas way back in the day. So I've worked on almost all of the Apple computers that ever came out.
Are you working out of like a garage, like the movie, basically like a classic garage startup?
Yeah, that's actually how Westwood started. By the time Brett and I started working together, and he said, "Hey, I think we're going to go off instead of working through another company." So we worked with some other companies, and basically back then we had our own computers. We did all the design, we did all the coding, we did everything, all the artwork. But we were getting contracts from like middlemen. They would go out to publishers, get a deal, and then they would hire us. And he said, I think we have the business acumen. We should just go build our own business and just cut out the middleman. And that's when we started Brello Software. That was a name for a day. That was gone. That was a terrible name. And we were talking about all these different names. I said, I just don't want to be Animal Soft, because I have this great business as a consultant where I do sort of serious stuff for point of sale systems, attorneys, and doctors. And I don't think that, a doctor is going to hire somebody that's Koala Soft or whatever. It just sounds kind of ridiculous back then. So at the time, in high school, I used to go down to California. Basically anybody under 21 was persona non grata in Vegas. And so we used to go down to Los Angeles and go down to Westwood. and hang out, because that's where UCLA was, the coffee shops were, and it was still kind of the film industry, but also kind of, serious enough. So we called ourselves Westwood Associates. And Brett went and contacted one of the former guys we had contact with. We got our very first contract. And that's kind of a fun story, so I'll share it real fast here. We go and we meet with this guy, Bob, and he says, hey, Bob Lindsay is his name. He says, hey, Brett had reached out to him. He goes, so you want to make a game? He goes, well, we really don't know. We're Epic's computers, EPYX, by the way, not Epic Games. And they did all these games they used to call them sports games, but they're really Twitch games where you just like click on things like a decathlon, if you remember the old days, and Atari 800s and stuff like that. Anyways, he said, we have this game. It's a Temple of Abshai trilogy by John Freeman, and we need to convert it for the Macintosh. And we're on the phone now, of course, we don't video calls or anything like that. So, and he goes, can you guys do that? And I go, yeah, sure, we can do that. And he goes, oh, great, that would be fantastic. It'd be a great first project, because none of our guys know the Macintosh, and so would love to do it. So, of we hang up the phone, and Brett looks over at me and he goes, I didn't know you had a program on Macintosh. And I go, I own a Mac. How hard can it be? Right. So, how hard can it be is like a big part of my life. How hard can it be?
Or you commit to it and then you figure it out on the back end.
Yeah, exactly. Committed to it. Got the contract, signed it up. I signed up for Apple developer. Got the development books for the Macintosh. I had been programming and assembly on an Apple II for a while then, and it was 1,700 pages. It was not a small thing, because it was a whole Pascal operating system, and I knew how to program in Pascal because of college, but it was quite an adventure to go from no knowledge whatsoever and have to deliver a game in 4 months. That was quite serious. I mean, we had signed up for it. We delivered the game on time and within the budget, which was only like, I don't know, it might have been $10,000, if that. It might have been less than that. I don't remember anymore, but it was very, very little money. So we were off and running. We got our very first check. It was a couple $1,000s. And we had used to have it in the office. And I'm looking at this check and we're all excited and everything. I'm like, how do we cash this? Right? Because we hadn't even like thought about it. And they're like, well, okay, so it's not to either of our names. So found out, you have to create a business. You have to get a fictitious name filing. You have to open a bank account. So that's how we built Westwood. We literally started with our first check and worked backwards to create a company and build the first game. Started our first contract by committing to making a game before we had actually, even on a system we didn't even know if we could program on or not, using the language I never used for making a game. So it's kind of crazy, but that was the wild, wild west. That was the charge into the dark and hope you don't hit anything short. So
that's amazing. I mean, I think there's so many lessons in there that we've all probably have had. I know I have personally, where you do something before you're ready, or you take on that contract and you're like, now I got to figure it out.
Yeah.
And or even just doing contract work in general and then seeing what that turns into. Like, you delivered a product and then you're like, oh, we have a business here. You weren't even business first, and not that it has to be chicken or the egg. Like, either one can come in any order. But I bet you that probably propelled your guys' sense of confidence into the next things that you would then go and make.
Yeah. And so we talked about it. Brett and I talked and said, why do we want to create a company? We did talk about that before we started getting the contract. And, he said he really wanted to build something big. And I said, I just want to work with people I want to work with. I'm tired of already at that point working. It's been a few years and a few projects. And I was tired of working with people I just didn't enjoy being around. Oh, I really like hanging around with Brett. And so we said, from a culture point of view, we wanted to be a place where it was fun to work. Because if you're doing your hobby and you love your work, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like fun. And we're creating fun anyway. So if you're not having a good time, it'd be pretty awful to feel like you're kind of working a salt mine. It's going to reflect in your work if you're not enjoying it. So we really did have an idea of what to do. We just didn't know what we were doing, basically. We just thought we know how to build a game. The one thing we did know how to do was make a game, because we had already made quite a few games together and he had made even more than me. So I think by the time we started Westwood, it was probably my fourth or fifth game. So I'd already done a few things. There was a time there, actually maybe more than that, because there was a time where I was trying to make a game every month, just to try to make something really simple. And I learned assembly language programming because back then, basic programming on the Apple was just too slow. You couldn't get anything to happen. There were no tools or anything. So you had to do assembly language. And essentially the code you would type in on the magazine would be a bunch of basic code. And then it would be a data table of just numbers. But that number was actually assembly language. That's what the customer was typing in. So you were really encouraged to write very, very small code, because the number of numbers that people had to type in mattered. Like if row after row after row of numbers would be pretty awful. So you learned how to be very efficient as well. Anyway, that started Westwood, and we hired our first. We finished we finished Temple of Abstract Trilogy on the Mac. I did all our artwork for it and everything else. I did the artwork and the programming. Brett did the design and the business management. And we got they called us up and said, "You guys are doing such a great job. You're delivering ahead of time. Um, can you do Can you do this for the Amiga and for the ST?" And the Amiga hadn't even come out yet. And I said, "Well, yeah, sure. It's 68,000. We should be able to do it because it was all in assembly language, anyways." And we got our first Amiga. It was a metal box that had it was basically a black metal box with a bunch of cards in it and some wire wrap inside of it, like some places where the finished hardware wasn't done, so they had threads inside of it. So it was like looked like literally like a science experiment. And that was our very first Amiga. So we started working on that, and we realized pretty quickly that to do Amiga and ST, even though I wrote the game in 68,000 with two new operating systems to learn, we needed somebody else. So we hired our first employee. We started Westwood in March of '85, or we hired our first employee of October of '85, which was Barry Green. And he had to quit his job. He's a manager at a Taco Bell. He was a big customer of Century 23, good programmer, and he had to quit his job, so we had to pay him. It wasn't like it wasn't one of those things where he could come in and be a partner. And that was true for forever, I suppose. We never really had any other equity partners until we sold the company in '92 to Virgin. So,
Wow.
yeah. So that was the start. A long story, but it's a lot of fun, little fun anecdotes in there.
Oh no, it's just so beautiful. I mean, I could see it. The 1980s, Las Vegas. Such a random question. I'm gonna throw it out. Do you ever get any offers from like connected people, the mafia, picturing Vegas in the '80s, the casino, and not
No, not really. I work downtown. So I guess there's the thing back when you live around that element, um, you don't you don't think about it as much. Like it's like you look at these movies, Casino and all that. My dad, when he first came to Vegas, he came in 1957 from Chicago. Name is Casolari. He was Italian, but he wasn't affiliated. When he came to town, he was told to go look up Modalitz. I don't know if you guys don't know who that is. It's a famous mafioso. And, to get a job. And he asked the guy, he said, well, he goes, "What can you do?" And he says, "Well, I do anything." He goes, "We want to go home and think about that. Come back to me and give me an answer of what you really want to do." Because, you don't do anything for the mob, right? It's really not the right answer. And then he never went back. He said, that guy, he thought about it a lot. He goes, "Oh shit, I don't want to do that." So he got into the gambling business because he used to sell cars. He said he wanted to get into an honest business. So, but I never thought about being in the gambling industry. It wasn't something I was interested in. So for me personally, never really ran into that element because I was a computer geek and hanging out with a bunch of people in computer stores. We never really ran into that kind of folks. When I was 16, I worked for my friend's father worked for Al Sachs, who was allegedly connected. And we got jobs through that as busboys. That's the closest I've ever been. Otherwise, other than that, and getting to be good friends with Oscar Goodman much later in life, I've had very little to do with any of that side of Vegas.
Wonderful. I love the concept of doing a game a month. So that was a personal challenge that you gave yourself.
Yeah, when I did Squirm, the first one, and I was waiting. I was sending in all the copies to the magazines, everything else. And after about 2 or 3 months of getting a lot of no's, I just said, you know what, I'm just going to, if I can't do with one thing that I thought I did really well, when I just do a bunch of stuff, right? And so I'd have a concept that go, oh, how about like, remember Space Invaders? That was a little too complicated. Like Ample Panic, which was this game where you dig holes, kind of like Mario, but you dig through the platforms and stuff. So I did like a little platformer. Then I'd go, okay, what about this game? What about that game? I would just basically I'd see something in an arcade and go, what's the core feature of that that's fun? Let me make some little game around that, write it in BASIC and assembly and ship it. The goal was to finish one a month. And I kind of did that, but I only got them out every couple or 3 months. Could I get them typed out on a page, sent to a magazine, all that? I ended up publishing a bunch of them though, probably 7 or 8 of them before Westwood started.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think there's a big lesson in that, just being prolific for its own sake rather than working on, which I've, subjected myself on, the epic project. And then you get so lost in the details and scope creep comes in. And sometimes it's better to make a bunch of little things that just are complete, than.
Especially now. I mean, if I was starting now, there's these great tools. I'm using Unreal Editor now. So I would probably just jump in the Unreal Engine, find some quirky little indie game that seemed interesting, and even scope that down and say what was fun about that. Try to make just the fun part of that turn it into a game, but actually try to finish the game with everything, including you'd start it up as a standalone application, play the game and finish the game, have some sort of end game, or even if it was an endless randomly generated thing, something where you'd say, okay, I've finished it, and stick it out there. I would do as much of that as I can. My son does solo games, and he does the same thing. He's done a bunch of games so far, and a couple that have done okay. If you sold thousands of units, not millions, but thousands of units, so not bad.
Yeah,
I gotta jump in here and ask. You keep saying that you would ship it off to a magazine. Was that like they would print out your code and people would then input it themselves, or what?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's
Wow.
precisely how it worked back then. Before you could mail, you couldn't you couldn't do tape cassettes because you could for really complicated games or really big programs like VisiCalc or whatever. You could do that, but people didn't have cassette drives or disk drives. You didn't know if they had them or not. So the only thing you could be sure for distribution was magazines from the beginning. Then cassette tapes became pretty prevalent. By the time we started Westwood, they had the 5 1/4 inch floppies, so you had floppy disks. So by then, we were doing, like, I did a thing called Binary Access Manager, which was a little tool that I used. I packaged that, shipped it to a bunch of computer stores, and had people writing me all the time. I learned, like, you can't do your own customer support. That's terrible. But there was all these little weird projects we did along the way. So I'm kind of skipping over just a lot of hobbyist bull that just didn't lead to anything. We look back and you look back on your life, and looking from where you are, looking back, you see all the paths that led to that point, and it feels like it was sort of destiny or something. But if you really think about it, you go all the way back, and all the paths that you didn't take, or they just sort of things that, at least for me, I was always doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So a lot of that just dead ended, and I just didn't do that anymore. I did something else. So, anyways, yeah.
didn't you use Unreal Editor? So you do that like today? You
Yeah.
sort of get
Yeah,
engine.
I'm working on a cool little project that is kind of fun. That if we have time, I can share something with you guys later. I don't know how this is with Google Meet, so I probably have to. You probably have to let me share, and I probably have to, because it has to be from my phone. But we can try to figure it out later if you want, if we have time.
Yeah, that would be
Good.
wonderful. I think maybe prior to the Q&A, or afterwards, or whatever, let's see what you're working on now. I always kind of wondered that is when you have these like people who've been in the industry since pretty much its inception. You know, they start out usually in some sort of technical position, and then they end up in an inferior position. And then how does their life, do they ever get to, maybe they're in a creative role, but they're more directing, do they actually get into the computer? So it's just so cool that to hear that, you are using what are, I would venture to say, are extremely different tools in programming and assembly. Wow.
Yeah. These tools, like, so what I really like about Unreal Engine or Unreal Editor 5.2, I think I'm on, or 3 maybe, the newest one. I really like the visual scripting, the blueprint scripting side of it, which, as an assembly language programmer, that's as far as you get, right? From stuff. But I enjoy it because it's fast to just kind of plug things together and do things. I'm told my blueprints just don't look like other people's blueprints because they're done like an assembly language program might do them, because they're very modular and very granular. It's probably a little different than most people, but still, I just like the tool. I have Visual C++, and I started to fire it up, but I decided to just try to build everything with blueprints, because at the end of the day, most of the people that are going to be working on this project will probably be working with Blueprint, and I want to be proficient in it just to understand what they're doing. At some point, the company we're just starting up now, but at some point it'll grow. And once again, I'll be in a role where I don't get to touch it as much. In fact, I've got some guys in Argentina. I'm already spending most of my time in doing layouts in PowerPoint and doing specifications in Google Docs and stuff like that. I'm not spending as much time in Unreal as I was even a couple months ago. So, unfortunately.
One of my hopeful dream interviews like this one is to interview Tim Sweeney of Epic, and I really want to find out where the blueprint visual scripting concepts kind of get integrated into Unreal at such a high level. And for those who don't know, it's a way of coding where you draw the code, where like almost like dominoes, it goes from left to right, one thing knocking another, and you can program just about anything in it. 98% of use cases, but you can be extremely fast in terms of iteration developing. You're not going to misspell things like you would with programming syntax. And for me, it was the thing, I think somebody who can think logically like that, but more of an artist. I kind of failed on Unity which was a great engine for a lot of people who were getting in game development because it just didn't work in my mind. But then in trying Unreal, that blueprint visual scripting really, I think, is the engine's secret weapon. I mean, you see it in other engines, but it's so thoroughly integrated through Unreal.
Yeah.
They're first kind of apt to do that outside of like an educational context. Scratch will do visual scripting, but it's more like to teach you how logic happens. But it's really profound. And it's interesting that somebody like you who knew much more baser languages could then make the leap to something like visual scripting.
Yeah, my languages of choice. I've programmed in something, last time I counted, like 40 something languages, we include individual assembly languages, because I've done things in Forth, Ada, C++, C Sharp, Java, JavaScript, Perl. I mean, just it goes on and on. And for the assembly languages, Z80, 6502, 65816, 68000, 8088, 8086, the whole litany of the Pentium chips. And my career as a programmer started with the beginning of the company, and I've always been I was always pretty close to the metal. So I did like voice synthesis and voice recognition on Apple II, using essentially using the 6502 as a digital signal processor, co-processors, because the Commodore 64 had a CPU inside of its disk drive. So I used to use the 65 C10 as a co-processor for the game so that I could get two processors. So we could do some pretty fun stuff on the Commodore 64. With the 68,000, the Amiga, it had Alice and Agnes and all the other chips. We had to learn how those programmed. I wrote my own operating system for the Amiga because I hated Intuition. So I was a very low-level programmer. I wrote all the 3D rendering systems that Westwood did until probably well into the early 90s. So at least 5 or 6 years of 3D software, renderers as well as full 3D systems. So yeah, crazy detailed technical voxels, all this stuff. And then things got busy, as you point out. I started leading teams, bigger and bigger groups. I'd get involved every now and then, like when shaders started first becoming capable, I would write some shaders just because I liked tinkering. When the PlayStation 2 came out with the vector units, I had tinkered with those too. So I made some stuff in the vector units that we used in some of our games. But I went from being a day-to-day programmer, studio art director, to being a day-to-day COO, then eventually the CEO of the company. I headed the finance department. So for a while there, I was really deep into finance, but I hired people and then eventually just ran that department or oversaw it. But all along the way, I was always a hobbyist. And so my hobby was programming and art. So I'd trinkle in a little bit of artwork, programming, or bits of code and stuff into games all the way well into the 90s, even to some extent into the 2000s. So I've stayed to this day, I'm still kind of a tinkerer. Like I want to do off-screen indicators and on blueprints with Unreal. And I went online and everybody said, yeah, you can't really do that. So I did it anyway. So or with blueprints, and it's much faster than the linear algebra stuff that somebody else did. I go, this is ridiculous. This is way too over-engineered. But that's another story. So I have millions of stories.
I love that. I think that I have the same compulsion where you find ways that the engine is kind of not doing something that you notice an opportunity to make better than the engine, and make a new tool or whatever. And it's like discovering gold or something. The more you do,
I think with blueprints and Unreal, that's incredibly capable. And even though it's an interpreted based language, the modules, the nodes that you put together are they compile down really efficiently. So the good thing about it is if you're a logical programmer, you can basically get very performant code that would work as good as just about anything else that was optimized as an interpreted language. So it's a C# or something like that. Still managed. So it's like a managed, it's like one step removed from managed language. So you do lose some performance, but it's very performant. And the material editor is incredibly performant. And the debugging tools actually give you the number of cycles and everything. So if you use some node and your cycles go crazy, you go, oh, okay, I got to figure out another way to do that. So I find it very, very efficient. However, it is a bit like giving a monkey a gun. You can be really, really bad at blueprints and you can make some really ugly stuff. So it just depends on how you use it. Like any tool, it's as good as the person using it. So.
Yeah, get all actors of class and casting on tick. Not the best idea.
Yeah, there's exactly like 3 places in all the code that cast anything for me, because it's like I want to know things that are implicit. I want to know what kind of structure it is, but I'm probably way too technical for this particular call.
But I really I appreciate you expressing even that sentiment, because you talk about culture, and it's one thing that I have become more fascinated with in the course of all organizations, but certainly in the technical organizations, is the personalities involved. You're hiring not just somebody who's really skilled, but like, how do they mesh with the chemistry of an overall team? I've been on teams where people will have, like, they're like against blueprints because they're a C++ person, or you see this on Reddit sometimes, and it's like, well, they'll make arguments like, well, blueprints, runs 100 times slower than C++, but it's still so fast. So
Also, it depends on how you write your blueprints and how bad you are at C++.
right. So everything is context specific.
But it's definitely faster. I mean, being down the middle. But you can write your own C++ nodes for blueprints. So it's kind of a silly argument. The biggest argument against any kind of node-based editors is they still don't have version control and source control that works well. So the hardest part is when you're trying to merge things. So if you're working with a bunch of people, they did go to one file per asset, which helped a lot. But still, it's funny. It's being solved by AI, because you can actually give two versions of your project and ask AI to tell you what's different between them as blueprints, and it'll actually analyze it and tell you where the code changed and what the impact of that was. So weirdly enough, I think that's going to end up solving it, because right now the standard notion of version control and mergers and being able to merge code is just much better with a text-based or markup language of some sort. And that's the biggest problem about blueprints, is that it doesn't create an intermediary XML or something like that. That you can do it, but it's not a good pipe, so you can't easily merge.
I want to ask you then, what do you see? Where that's one example of it. The frontier that we're on in terms of technology and the LLM and the rise of ChatGPT and those last couple weeks, DeepSeek, and the fact that 3 years ago, photos and videos on the internet were real. Now you don't really know, and the implications for games, and infinite text and AI voices. What do you have any predictions about where we're going with AI?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think from the beginning, I've been a kind of, I suppose I've felt that AI would be more expert systems, less less general purpose. So it's not just the overhead for ChatGPT to say, oh, I'm writing a Python script, or I'm writing haiku, or I'm describing directions to a grocery store. It's not just that it has to have under all this context. It's also that to optimize any kind of large language or large data model, which I have a bit of experience with. Several years ago, we started a company called Telling Investments that actually did every trade in the United States stock exchanges for like 40 years, and put it all under a giant database, a giant Hadoop cluster. And what we were looking for is kind of ways of determining patterns. This goes beyond the scope of this meeting, but it was very successful. And using those large language models or large data models, I recognized very quickly when ChatGPT was coming out at OpenAI, is like, well, really what's going to happen is you're going to have AI that does a thing, right? And so this is what Apple Intelligence is really smart about. Samsung's following suit, and of course the Chinese now too. But an expert system is going to be better in the long run, because it already has the context of what the problem is it's working on. So I think you think about AI, it's not about going to one place to get anything. It's about finding the AI assistant agent that will do the thing you want it to do the best. So I think it's going to become massively fragmented and specific versus what people keep thinking is this ubiquitous thing. For game making, I think there will be game makers that you use AI. There are lots of people who are working on it, and you will be able to, as a person, put in some prompts, do some relatively little bit of work, and create something that is like a game. And it'll probably play okay. And unfortunately, we're going to have a whole new generation of asset flips. If you think it was bad before, oh my God, the stores are going to be full of just the worst amount of cruft that's going to be out there. It's just going to be somebody goes in there and types in a few things and goes, oh my God, that's a great shooter. Let me put it on the store. And you're just going to go, oh my Lord, how do I get through all this? So that's going to happen. That's going to be the negative side. But I think on the positive side, as creators, we're going to have very specific tools that make our lives as creators better and easier. So I just literally right before this call, I was in Photoshop trying to remove the background on an asset. What a pain in the ass, right? So already predictive generative AI is already better at doing that than ever before. And pretty soon it'll be like, I want to do this thing, just do this thing. And that will help unleash my creativity, unlock my creativity. And maybe someday, give me a blueprint that does this. But so far, all the blueprints I've seen AIs generate, all the code I've seen AIs generate is pretty, I guess it's okay, but it's not something that you'd want to rely on. I think it's a great learning tool. So if I wanted to go write, like, I haven't written in Python forever, I didn't do much work in it. So if I was going to go write a Python script to do something, I'd ask AI to write it, and then I would examine the script and say, okay, what do I like about it? What don't I like about it? I think that's the biggest tool. So I think AI becomes more and more useful as a tool. That's just in general, very, very broadly across all different industries everywhere. It's just going to become part of our lives in ways like the internet or computers did. I just don't think you're going to be distinguishing it anymore. Specifically, when it comes to games, I'm most excited about giving the generative AI to the customer, to the players, and letting them be the creators. Because I feel like it's super exciting. When I first got Midjourney, I'm a fine artist. I paint, I draw. But I got Midjourney, and I was able to just put in a couple of prompts. I was super excited about how easily I could convert my words into images and how good they were, really. And then I want to do something specific, and then it became really painful, right? And so, with that burst of experience of like, oh, that was really fun to create, I want to tap into that as a game maker and give customers that ability. I also think that for NPCs that are doing dialogue, like when we did Blade Runner, we had a big 6-inch binder of thousands and thousands of lines of dialogue to try to anticipate all the different variations. And now you can just use a trained system, and each one of the agents in the world can learn about you, remember your conversation, and it can actually feel like more like a real person, a real interaction. That's really exciting too. Creates issues with like, what am I doing? Like you should suddenly become a Bethesda game where you have no idea what to do. But because everybody seems important, so nobody's important, that kind of problem. But I think that's where we're going with AI. I think it's about great tools that are used by consumers as well as game makers. I think this current kind of sort of reaction, I don't want to buy a game that has generative AI assets in it, is like NFTs and other things. It's just like, I think it's kind of a bit juvenile. At some point, these things are going to be, they won't be money scams, and they'll be actually good tools to use. So,
Right. It'll be so ubiquitous, and it's been here long enough. A game that doesn't use it maybe has novelty, but
yeah, but it won't matter, right? Like, and even artists, most of the artists I know, professional artists I know, use generative AI, if nothing else, just to get good ideas, just to help spark some creativity. Some of the hardest things as an artist is the blank canvas syndrome, and generative AI is great for just crushing that, because you go, I kind of want to blah 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 blah, and you type it in, and it gives you a bunch of stuff. You go, okay, none of that is what I want, but maybe that, and you start digging around a little bit, and go, oh, that's kind of a good idea. That's something I didn't think of, and it inspires you. But it's difficult to have it create the actual final asset. In that case, I think most of the time you need to control it a bit. Yeah.
And the projects you're currently working on, are you intending to have some sort of generative AI included in the output there?
Yeah, the characters and the building skins basically let people create those using generative AI. I think it's an exciting place to be. It's very transparent in that case too, because when players go on board and they say, okay, well, I want to go create something, and there's a small fee, a premium currency to do it, it's very transparent. They know why. Like, it's like, oh, this thing has to go to a big farmer bank of computers and create this thing for me, and I get to be creative, and I pick which one I want, and it just feels really fun. It's a very honest and transparent transaction. It's not like I'm claiming that I wrote a great game, and all it is somebody else's game reskinned where I told the AI to replace all the art assets, right? That would be the kind of dark side.
Well, I think too, it's as a test of the psychology of the developer making the game, what's happening here with AI, because I think in many ways, we get really skilled at making something. We know an engine particularly well, and we're excited about things that we made, the developer. And this choice has been made, which is it about the developer having the fun, or is it about the player having the fun? And are you going to make that happen by any means necessary?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. You probably know where I fall on this, but it's all about customers. It's all about making things that people love. The name of our company, it's not out there yet, but it's called Childlike Wonder Games, because I love creating those moments of childlike wonder in games, whether that's squishing somebody with a tank in Dune, or or it's flying on the back of a dragon, or breaking a bunch of blocks like we did with Boom Blocks, which kind of was the inspiration for Angry Birds. So those are the kinds of things that I find exciting, and I love it when a lot of people play my games. That's the most exciting part.
Okay, I want to shift to some of the business stuff. So I'm curious, what was it like selling? So you went with Virgin and Richard Branson. Be curious about like what he was like to either work with.
Well, we built Westwood first. So it was two guys in a garage, then three guys in a garage before even the first year. We ended up being about 29 people by 1992. We had two really big hits, one called Eye of the Beholder, the other Eye of the Beholder 2. Not surprising. But in addition to that, like got 60, 70 other games over those years. That the 7 years we were very prolific as a company. And these were pretty big games, maybe even more than that actually, because we were doing 30 or 40 a year. So probably hundreds of games actually, if we really added up SKUs. If you said like for Disney, we did 3 games on 3 systems, that's 9 SKUs. You could say you made 9 games. I only count those as 3, right? The ports are not necessarily other games. Anyways, long story short, I got this call. We had an agent at the time. We had hired an agent about 5 years into the business because Brett and I just liked making games and we were tired of having to constantly try to drum up business. And this, I guess I know now, but he had called the Virgin, who we had worked for. We actually had a contract with Virgin to do a game called Dune II. And he had, I guess, he called the president of Virgin, said, Virgin Interactive Entertainment, and said, hey, you need to really impress these guys if you want to buy their company, have Richard Branson call it, right? So I'm sitting at this office and in the office, I get this call and he goes, hello, I have Richard Branson on the phone for you. So I go, okay. I had no idea who Richard Branson is. Never heard of the name. Couldn't care less, right? He goes, hello, Brett. I'm Richard. And I go, hi, but this is Lou. And he goes, oh, Lou. He goes, well, I said, my name is Richard and I work to buy your company. And
He's an hot air balloon at the time, probably.
Yeah. I'm like, well, yeah, it's like, but I'm like, yeah, I'm like, I said, well, I didn't know we were for sale. And he goes, oh, in my experience, everything is for sale. And it turns out he was right. You know, we were for sale. I just didn't know it. I went to Brett and I go, who is this guy? So we looked him up on LexisNexis and found out he was actually, was really an actual, at that time, maybe not a billionaire, but certainly a multimillionaire. And that started a bidding war between them and Sierra Online for Westwood. And because we started thinking about it, go, wow, it's costing us more to make games than we're getting paid, which is not a good business model going forward, at least the games we want to make. So we were using our residuals and our royalties and kind of other dumb luck to pay for making the games we wanted to make. Why not do that as a publisher? So that's how Westwood became a publisher. In 1992, we became Westwood Studios, changed our name, became a publisher. And then from 92 to 98, we sold the company in part to Hasbro. We created Hasbro Interactive Entertainment because we made Monopoly CD-ROM in 95, and that launched Hasbro Interactive Entertainment. They then sold their pit back to Viacom. Viacom bought us lock, stock, and barrel, and then Viacom sold us to Electronic Arts. So Westwood was sold 3 times before Electronic Arts. Electronic Arts was the 4th purchase. So that insane amount of money, I didn't get that money. I'd already sold the company before that. I was just working there, but it was fine. We were well taken care of over the years. And by the way, by the 4th time we sell the same company, you're pretty good at it. So
That sounds almost organizationally and corporately traumatic. I would be curious. I honestly,
it was very traumatic. The sale, not the sale. It's the pitch. It's the, Westwood had made so many games at that point. All the Legend of Kyrandia games. We had done the Dune games. We did Command and Conquer had come out. Red Alert had come out. The expansion packs for that. The Blaze Runner. I mean, all of these games came out before Westwood, before we were bought by EA. During that whole time, we were always for sale to somebody. And so people were constantly parading through the studios, seeing what we were up to. It was just a huge distraction. So it wasn't until Electronic Arts that Westwood finally settled, where we just settled. And so for the next 6 years or so, we were, I guess that's about right. I need about 5 years. 5 years, we were just part of EA and building games for EA, which was a breath of fresh air from not wondering who was going to buy you next week.
Right. I'd always wondered if EA had bought Westwood for market share in order to eventually close that out, or whether they
no, EA bought Westwood because we were creative the very first year. EA bought us because we were selling shit tons of games at that point.
Yeah.
And so we were doing a bunch of games and things. And what the biggest mistake we made, I suppose, was EA basically said Westwood had an interesting model. We had a lot of kind of lower priority projects or lower experimental stuff that we were doing that wasn't going to pan out well. And that doesn't really fit with EA, especially back then and even now. They only can ship so many games a year because as a publisher of that size, you only have so many, your marketing department, your salespeople, all that, they don't have time to do hundreds and hundreds of games. They gotta focus. And so when they bought Westwood, EA had said, well, we just want those AAA games. Stop doing all that other stuff you're doing. Just make AAA games, right? So it's like, okay, we take a company that had about a 50-50 blend of, it was actually a graduated blend. People had shipped tons of games together. That was obviously our AAA team, all the way down to college students, high school students. We'd hire anybody we thought had a lot of promise. And we had this nice graduation within our company where people could grow and learn on the job. We'd hire artists who'd never used never used computers before. That was the wonderful thing about Westwood, was this wonderful space where people could grow. Well, the minute you try to basically accelerate all those people to working on only AAA, some of them just aren't that good. We had to get rid of people, and it changed everything about the company. And I wish I had been a little bit more thoughtful about it. We just kind of barreled into it and started working on an MMO at the same time, working on the first third-person shooter, doing another Command and Conquer, another RTS game. We did a civilization kind of game, or pirates game with ships and everything. I mean, we're just doing everything. We're just all over the board, trying to bring all of those to the sort of level of quality that we were taking with Command and Conquer. Ultimately became just too much. It was just too challenging. And so ultimately we ended up getting collapsed with a bunch of the other EA studios to create Electronic Arts Los Angeles.
What was the organization like, and what parts of it were just like any other job versus which parts of it were weird and Silicon Valley style? You know, you got ping pong tables and the rest. I would love to know. Put me in a place where I'm working at Westwood, and whatever the peak of that experience is.
So the peak, correct? Because Electronic Arts. So before Electronic Arts, Westwood was always part of a company that was not as good at what we did as we were, right? So it gives you a weird amount of latitude to do just whatever you want and be very, very weird. So I'll talk about those days, because those are the fun days. Once we became part of Electronic Arts, it was very serious business. I mean, we were expected to deliver 8x, 10x on development dollars. We were competing with Madden, FIFA, Need for Speed. I mean, you're competing with the best of the best for internal resources. It changed everything about the company. So there were great things about that, because we worked with talent that we never did. Lots of people became very wealthy. We were able to hire people we were never able to hire before because we could pay them. We were able to take on massively difficult projects to varying degrees of success. But, that was later. But if you go back to Westwood, like 97, 98, the first thing you'd have to do is you'd have to have a very good sense of humor. We would probably be the poster child for so many lawsuits, not for anything nefarious, but for just the general pranks that were played on each other. We really were a massive playground, and did all kinds of silly things. And I don't think you couldn't get away with that now. Somebody somewhere would be deeply offended, and they would probably be right for being offended, right? I mean, you had to have a pretty thick skin, all in good. We called it childlike mischief. It was never meant intended to harm. But later in life, I've run into folks, and some of them were I think emotionally wounded and scarred by things that I knew happened. I just didn't attribute it as being all that serious. But you never know what people's perceptions are. So I think part of graduating and or learning and growing and maturing is realizing that, hey, it probably was a little bit too much of a playground. We were probably a little bit on the rough side. So I guess that's what you would have to be. At the same time, it was just a lot of fun. It was like Romper Room. I mean, people were just doing whatever goofy stuff they wanted to do. There really weren't a lot of controls. Our production process had a lot of room for experimentation. We were agile before people talked about agile in games. We just, go get a bunch of stuff done. Game design documents talked about how you wanted to make people feel, and go make a screen that does this, this, and this, without much beyond that. We didn't use Figma and layout tools and all that. You just kind of slung from swung for the fences and shot from the hips. We want to do a game for Blade Runner, and I said I want to have motion capture. So we did 2,800 motion capture sequences in our own studio. The motion capture systems were terrible at the time, so we just got one that was experimental from a company called Vicon, and started writing our own motion capture smoothing software. Why? Because that's what you do back then. Nowadays, just like, it would be ridiculous to roll all your own stuff the way we did back then. Even a rendering farm, there was no Incredibuild. So, we were doing these renders of these sequences for Command and Conquer, and they were taking a long time. So I said, well, why don't we just get a bunch of computers, stick them in a room, and have them all work on one frame. And when they're done, if you have 50 computers, we get 50 frames in an hour instead of one frame per hour. So we wrote the software that batch rendered the 3D Studio Max software. And Gary Yost and those guys came over. They go, "What the hell are you doing?" And, "Oh yeah, well, we just like load the project up on all these computers and have them all render the scenes, and then collapse all back together and composite later." I used to give a tour of Westwood Studios. We had 2 terabytes of hot data in 1994. The internet in 1994 was not 2 terabytes, all of it. Okay, so to put it in perspective, I used to laugh about that because the internet, of course, 1995, Windows 95 came out, the internet became ubiquitous for everybody. But just before that, there just wasn't that much stuff on the internet. It was all schools, and we used to have more data in our computing center than there was on the entire internet.
Amazing. Were there any like leadership principles that you found very useful in the course of leading Westwood?
There was a culture at Westwood that was organically grown around the people that had the influencers that were there, the people that influenced our culture. And we definitely had some principles. Like, we were definitely fearless. We would take on any problem, anything. We never expect that. But as far as like espoused leadership principles, we had values like most companies did, but honestly, we pretty much follow the same rule most companies do even today, which is the values are trotted out once a year when you're doing performance reviews to try to think about that, but they weren't lived day to day. I was the head of Amazon Studios for 4 years, and the leadership principles of Amazon are taken very, very seriously. We never did anything like that. But there were definitely values that we had. We valued hard work ethic, honesty, and integrity. We certainly valued aptitude, and effort over skills. So we were really not a good place for mercenaries. But back before we were purchased by EA, if you came into our company and you were good, but you were kind of a jackass, you'd be out very quickly. You wouldn't be respected. People would eject. The organism would reject you. You had to be pretty good natured, and you had to have things. That being said, we were pretty flexible. We had some guys that would come in 95, but that was very unusual. There were some people that came in 95, brown bagged their lunch. They worked an honest day and they were very productive. Other guys would work 16 hours, but they'd screw around most of the time and maybe not get quite as much time in. We had a wildly flexible compensation structure. So Brett and I really just managed all of that up until we were about 200 people. We literally had different deals for everybody.
Wow. And this was like a 50,000 square foot building, I think, right?
Yeah, 47,000 square feet was the space over on Tenea by the time we were purchased by EA. But about a third of that was our production studio, which was a giant green screen cyclorama and a workshop with belt sanders and drill presses and all the things you would need to build props, paint and everything else. Upstairs we had prop storage and a giant cage with all the collateral for swag and stuff like that.
What's it like driving by there nowadays?
Well, some years after we closed Westwood Vegas, they had a unfortunate thing where the sewer system had backed up and flooded the place over a weekend, and so it was basically a contaminated zone. So basically, they gutted those buildings. So the pictures that if you ever find old pictures of Westwood online, it only looked like that for a couple of years, and it was completely gutted. And so now I have no idea what's inside there. But when I look at the outside, it's got some nice memories, but it's like driving by an old school or something. You remember all the fun times. You don't remember all the kind of pain.
I think I want to do a few rapid fire questions and then into Q&A.
Into like the career and all that stuff. So I kind of presumed a bunch of stuff. I'm very Googleable. Lights are out these. Sorry, go ahead.
I think it'd be great if you want to, what are some things that you haven't, I didn't ask you, that you think would be of value to?
Well, I don't know. Just for complex of Q&A, I've done a bunch of stuff, right? So there's things you may not know. So I was on the board of a public company for public casino gaming company where I was the audit chair at one point because of my financial background. I learned finance by building Westwood. I don't know if anybody here cares about finance, but if you had a question, I'm a registered investment advisor with the telling investment stuff that I talked about. I was a chief strategy officer, helped architect our casino gaming platform. So I did get in casino gaming later in life. For just a brief period of time. We sold the company at Bally and I went back into video games. I've worked for Zynga as the head of product, or actually vice president of product development. I was a chief creative officer for EALA during the Medal of Honor, Lord of the Rings days. So I know a lot about all those games. Of course, co-founder of Westwood for all the RTS games. I ran Amazon Game Studios. We had a couple failed projects, but finished the games that were under development. I finished all the ones that I was given to finish. They didn't have the success I would have liked, but I never got a chance to start anything from scratch, which is what I joined for. So kind of chalk that up to learning. I've done a bunch of mobile games people may not know about. War Commander, Road Assault, and others that were quite successful. A lot of people don't know that I was the game director and the head of the project for Disney's Lion King for SNES and Genesis. So a bunch of games like that, I run it all the time. I'll talk to somebody and I've been working with them for 6 months or a year and they go, oh my God, you made blank. And so I've made so many games now, over 150 games, that I don't even remember which ones they are. I have 6 Game of the Years from the Dice Awards and Lifetime Achievement from the Game Developers Conference. We asked about the Game Developers Conference. I've been on the Game Developer Conference Advisory Board for 30 plus years. So got a wide range of things from business development, business leadership, fine arts, computer science, low-level programming. And I'm kind of an AMA guy, so there's probably nothing that's off limits. There you go.
What's your social security number? No, it's good. So I think I want to ask some rapid fires, but then we're going to jump into Q&A. That's so anybody, and I'll have Josiah, you managed picking the people. So you can raise your hand when we get to that portion in here. So that's, but if there's a few more questions I want to ask you. This one's not rapid fire. Take as long as you want with this, because I was dying to ask you.
Okay.
What was it like working with Steven Spielberg?
Oh yeah, that's another one. So how I came to work with Steven Spielberg is, well, I'll try to answer it quickly. Well, I went to quit EA. I had been at EA. They bought the company in 98. We closed Westwood Vegas in 2003. By 2006, I'd been there for 3 years as a chief creative officer, working out of Vegas. My kids were growing up. I was kind of I was fine. I could retire. I was kind of done. At least I was going to start a new game company in Vegas, actually. So I'm not really done. But I went into my boss's office then, Neil Young, who I worked with at Virgin many years before, and walked in and I said, yeah, like I just finished my 7 weeks. I'm kind of wanted to chat with you anyways. And he goes, yeah, I want to chat with you too. And I said, yeah, I think I'm going to move on. He goes, well, that would be really unfortunate because I've kind of sold this guy on you. He wants to make games with the AOL studio. And if it wouldn't be too much trouble, could you stick around and make games with Steven Spielberg? And I'm like, bastard. Well, yeah, of course. Of course.
Heard of him.
Yeah, I'm going to make games with Steven Spielberg. What does that even look like? And so what it looks like is Steven loves games. So he came to the studio. He was scheduled to come every week on Thursday or Friday for an hour. Realistically, he came 3 out of 4 weeks and he'd stay 3 or 4 hours. And he never came when he was supposed to. Like it would be Tuesday afternoon at 2. And, they'd say, oh yeah, Steven's going to be here at 4. And fortunately at the time, for a very weird circumstance, one of my other many things I did, I ran a private jet company called Part 72, whatever they are. But basically, well, when there's an owner operator jet, so I was part of a consortium that owned a jet. So I actually had a private jet for a little while, and I flew it back and forth. So it was perfect for my years with Steven because when Spielberg would call up and say he's coming to the studio in a couple hours, I could actually be there in 2 hours, even if I happen to be in Vegas. So, but what was it like working with him was an original question. And it just was a pleasure. He loved games. He was collaborative. He had all sorts of great ideas. And you had to kind of dig a little bit to know what he was trying to get at. My favorite one is we worked on these Boombox games, which was basically for the Wii, because he saw Miyamoto using the Wii to throw objects. And so he wanted to make a Wii game. And he said, I really want to make a Wii game about physics because I believe that entertainment in general is about generally predictable, but specifically surprising events. And I think people love physics because of that. They look at it and they go, I just want to see how this stuff falls. I know how it's going to kind of fall, but how's it exactly going to fall? It's really intriguing. And he uses that for his, or at least he says he uses that for his stories and stuff too, is to give you that predictability. You kind of go, oh, I know what's going to, oh, that's not exactly what is going to happen. In that moment of fun and entertainment is where he tries to build his entertainment. That's where he thinks is really exciting. So Boombox was about throwing objects and knocking things over, and these little fun characters jumping around. He wanted to play them with his kids who were quite young at the time. And so we started making that game, and he was talking about, wouldn't it be great if the people could make all the rules and they could just create any kind of game they want? So kind of like Roblox, but maybe much simpler. And if you haven't played Boombox, basically there's an editor mode where you can set up the game rules and you can basically build your own game. And the best way I could describe it, if you haven't played Boombox, is just think Angry Birds in 3D, because it actually preceded Angry Birds. And just like 2048 was preceded by Trees or whatever, it basically was a more complicated version of Angry Birds because you could use the Wii to throw objects and all that stuff. Well, ultimately, before we parted ways, Spielberg said, "Oh, I really want to make a mobile game for platform for tablets. I just got this tablet from Jobs, and it's this really cool thing, and I want to make this iTablet, um, uh, iPad, and I want to be able to make a game that's like big boom blocks where you pull with a rubber band and you throw things sideways and knock them down." He basically described Angry Birds before Angry Birds, and then EA Mobile said, "Oh yeah, we can't do that because there's too many mobile games out there, mobile platforms out there that use blocks." So it has to be more of a tile-based game. So they did a Boom Blocks on mobile, which was tragically not Boom Blocks at all. But it's always one of those favorite things. Spielberg also said way back in the day when he did the first Medal of Honor, a lot of people don't know that he did the first Medal of Honor, and he said, "Hey, wouldn't it be cool if you had a game about being like a person in a room, and you had to go to a job every day, and you cooked dinners and you had recipes?" He basically describing The Sims to a T. And then the room left, and everybody's like, "Who wants Spielberg? Who's going to make a game about cooking, right? Who wants to do that, right?" So it's like he just was just a wonderful human being to work with, super pleasant, and he just thought about things differently, and he just saw things that people would find entertaining. So that's the answer. That's what I was like to work with. It was actually truly a delight.
Amazing. Did you ever come across Steve Jobs and all that?
I never met Steve Jobs. Wozniak several times. I got to be quite good friends with with Robin Williams through a mutual friend, and then lots and lots of other people throughout. Because Westwood had a filming studio, we got to know a lot of actors and actresses over the years that we would call back in multiple times. We used Dreams of Jones many times. Got to meet him and hang out with him. And then some people were just purely professionals. Patrick Stewart came in and did a reading for Lands of Lore. Came in, read, and left, and did his job and did it great. So that was all good.
Amazing.
So got a chance to meet a lot of them though. And then weirdly through some family things, got to know Lenny Kravitz and briefly, not really personally, but we have mutual relationship with Vanilla Ice, believe it or not, weirdly enough. But so
Earlier, you're kind of like the Forrest Gump of the
Voltaire, if you want to go way back. But I have weird places I've done weird things and run into weird things. But it was always about, I think that's the thing, a takeaway is you never really know what it's going to run into. If you just keep exploring things and don't say no, why not? Why not just, instead of a lot of people, well, why would I do this or why would I do that? I think, why not? Why not try it? What's the worst that could happen, right? And that led me to have a lot of adventures in life that I probably would have never had.
So I'm going to ask some questions. If you could do just a quick answer, and then when we get through these, we'll keep them short. We're going to open it up, everybody, until 4:30. That's Q&A. These questions I think will be useful. So first off, I'd love to get your perspective. What makes a good game good?
Wow. I guess I'm just answering a question here. Sorry, I know you just said you'll do it later, but I just wanted to answer that one. What makes a good game good? I think that's interesting. I think what makes a good game good is when a customer, a player, enjoys it, right? Fundamentally, I think that's the thing that ultimately is a good game, right? That usually, but not always, leads to commercial success. I think for me personally, what I value as a good game, because then you have to ask yourself, well, what does good mean? Is it just about a rating? Is it just about how do you measure, did people like it? Right? Because if it's hugely successful and it sells a lot of units, obviously somebody liked it. You don't fool that many people, especially anymore. So commercial success is one way to measure a good game. I don't think it's the only way, or some maybe not the best way. I think it's a mix of meeting people's enjoying that childlike wonder moments I talked about before, but making people feel like a fan. If you can create something that makes a fan, that even one person that becomes passionate about your creation and wants to contribute to the overall value of its intellectual property, I think that becomes a good game. But they don't have to be commercial successes. And I think oftentimes people point way too much weight on distribution, depth of distribution, width of distribution to say it's good or not.
I think this will be the last question, and then we'll do Q&A, and Josiah, you'll take over. What would you say, or maybe if you want to pick three, go more than that if you want, what are the psychological qualities of an effective game designer or game developer? So people who are aspiring to be in this field, what qualities should they have?
The ones they need I'll talk about the ones they need and what I think you should have. Well, I'll start with, I think you should be kind, right? Because I think that's the one thing we need more of in this world, especially in games. Be kind. Just don't be a jerk. These are the principles for my new company, by the way. So full disclosure. The second one is do your best. If you're not a lifelong learner, you're not willing to be passionate, you're not willing, if you think you're going to get in the games industry to work 4 hours a day, this isn't the industry for you. There are other places to do that where you can make a living. There are not many places you can be great if you're not passionate about it. So you really do have to do your best. I think I might deviate a little bit here, but I think another thing is to really, as a quality, you want to be an entertainer. You want people to be entertained by what you do. You want people, is for making video games, you have to have it in your DNA to want to make other people enjoy something. I could argue that some programmers can just be so passionate about programming that they love solving those puzzles and they don't really have to care that much about the game design. But if you're going to be a game designer or a game director, or you're going to contribute to the visual, anything that's customer facing, you kind of need to care about entertaining them. So I think that's really important. That doesn't mean you need to be an extrovert. It might be exactly the opposite, where you're an introvert and you love to entertain people, but you're just terrible at it. And so this is your mechanism, right? I think those are the qualities that make it. I think you have to be willing to be poor and excited about being rich, because it's not a great industry to make money, but it's a wonderful industry if you're successful and you can do very, very well. I think those are kind of the qualities. I believe you have to earn trust. It's another one of our core principles. I think you need to believe in yourself. This industry will easily tear you apart. People will tell you all day long, you can't do that, you can't do this. I was told as an artist you couldn't be a programmer. I became a programmer. As a programmer, you can't be a game director because you're too technical. So many times in my life, the litany of people that said I couldn't do it was far, far greater than people that encouraged me. And I find that it's just too bad. I think the world gets very jealous of people who do love to do what they do, and they do it every day.
Love it. All right, Q&A.
Yeah, first off, that's so awesome that you worked on. That you worked on The Lion King. I loved that game growing up.
There were 13 people who worked on The Lion King. I hired every one of them.
Wow.
I hired the game director. My wife gave birth to twins. I spent 34 days in Florida. So believe me, I paid the price on Lion King, but we got it done in 6.5 months. So.
That's awesome. Rodrigo asked in the Q&A, do you have a favorite game, either one of your creations or a competitor's?
Oh, my creations is easy. Easier, I suppose. I loved making and playing a game called Dragon Strike, which was a very early flight simulator. You look it up, you just won't understand why, but it was a fractally generated world, and essentially the computers were too small back then to build massive flyable worlds. So my solution was to generate the world every frame mathematically. So I love that from a technical elegance point of view. I like playing it, and I love doing the artwork for it. And I wrote the story for the world of Krem that got included into canon for D&D, which is a geeky dungeon master for 16 years, was like the best present ever. So I love making that game. I don't know if it was my favorite game, but it was my favorite game to make. Blade Runner was another one of my favorite games as a technical director and an art director, because we pulled so many tricks. And the thing I said I would share, from if we can go over or whatever, I can share a video of it. It relies on kind of the technical wizardry we did to create Blade Runner. Those are kind of my biggest favorite games to work on. And Lion King was a lot of work. It was painful. It was very rewarding, but it wasn't my favorite game. My favorite games would be Dragon Strike. By the way, Dragon Strike was like the last game that I made where I made the game. Like, I was the guy who made the game. We had a couple of the programmers, but they did like the interface screens and stuff like that. And the artwork was done by Rick Parks, but I did a piece of all the artwork, not all of the artwork. So literally the game was the closest thing to my personal expression as a solo dev. It's the last one in 1989 that I did.
Wow. So. That's awesome. Jeff has his hand raised. So Jeff, if you'd like to come off.
I'll address the Lion King. It's really simple. There's a thing called Blockbuster back in the day where you could rent games. If you could beat the game in a weekend, Disney wouldn't ship it, because they said, so we did our test, and the first test we passed in flying colors. The second test, they said, oh, your game is too easy. And it was a week and a half before we had to submit the Gold Masters to, or the Gold Masters. They were actually EEPROMs at the time. We had to submit those to Sega and to Nintendo, and so we had nothing. There was no tool. All we could do was make the monkey puzzle longer and harder. That was the only way we could confidently make the game hard enough so that Disney would give us the thumbs up.
All right, Jeff, you're up.
Thanks. That was The Lion King was the first one, and then so thank you. My kid just beat it, so thanks for doing that. He
It
used
worked really hard. On top of that, it was a hard game because games used to be hard.
yeah. The
guys are all
Genesis games are way hard. Yeah. You mentioned Argentina when you were talking about getting someone to someone. Do you work with a lot of Argentines? And
Yeah. Yeah, my business partner Val Geese, famous in his own right. The three founders are Val. He's created New Republic Films with Brian Oliver. So he did 1917, Rocket Man, Elton John story, Top Gun, Maverick, Mission Impossible, a bunch of movies you've heard of, and then also started a bunch of game studios. So he moved down to Argentina because we found some great talent down there, and we're trying to raise money to make the game. And it turns out that cost of development in the United States, I do want to have a number of people I've worked with before, so they'll be expensive and they're here, but we have to find places that are a little less expensive, and that's why Argentina.
That's cool.
Great talent by there. They're not new in career.
They're awesome. They're awesome people. Yeah. Last question I got. Anything hilarious that you like hid or did in order to ship a game? Like any kind of crazy buzz or something?
Back in the day, we used to put Easter eggs in everything. Like, because once Westwood was a publisher, we didn't need permission anymore. We didn't have anybody that, until EA bought us, we could be really, we could do all kinds of crazy stuff. So God has so many of them, but they're all kind of inside jokes. I don't know that they would even make any sense. Okay. They made us chuckle a lot. But almost every game Westwood did from early days all the way, I guess probably about 89 to, let's see, 92, from 92 to 98, those 6 years, which is probably about 60 or 70 games. And every one of those had something in there there was a really wicked reviewer named Scotia. She was just really rude. It was her thing. She was sort of the shock jock, like Don Rickles, if you really want to go back, or somebody like that, just obnoxious. And so we made this hideous oozing monster and called it the Scotia. So we did stuff like that.
Well, like all the Virgin games had like secret menu codes.
We put them. Lion King has a couple, but we had to give them to Disney. I just don't remember what they are now, but there were a couple up, down, left, right things that you could do at the main menu, and you could do some fun things to the game. It just they were kind of pedantic, though. We couldn't do anything very dramatic without Disney getting upset. So
thanks, man.
Sure.
Anyone else want to? I ask Lou here a question.
Do you mind turning on the share button? I'm going to see if I can share something cool with you guys.
Yeah, I would love that. Let's see.
And I'm happy to answer more questions soon. There might be some up there. I don't know. It doesn't look like it. No. Okay.
If you do have a question, hit the raise your hand button on Google.
Josh is trying. Jose's trying to set up. Okay.
Yep. And Andrew, if you'd like, you come off mute and you can ask, or you can send it in the chat.
So kind of a follow-up question to the AI comments from earlier. I'm curious, do you see them becoming more of a force multiplier, for the developer or the artist, or do you see it as something that could potentially impact gaming jobs, right, and how the gaming pipeline works as the technology advances?
Yeah, I think both, right? I mean, I think that unfortunately, it's not an either or in this case. So I hope that it is going to cost jobs. I mean, but it's going to cost. It's kind of a funny thing. Like in the beginning, a lot of concept artists thought, "Oh my God, they're out of business." But what's weird is because there are more creators able to more quickly create something that's closer to what they want, but it's not exactly what they want. They're sending the concept artists the 3D or the generative AI stuff and saying, "Hey, can you create something like this, but this way?" And they personally are using the tools too. So I think it's going to be a force multiplier, and it's going to cost some people their jobs tragically. But I am very much I'm very much an optimist that the world gets to be a better place with technology, not a worse place. And then a lot of people will point to all the horrible things that technology does. And I go, yeah, but on balance, I think there's more good than bad. In the same case, I think generative AI on balance will create more opportunity to keep up with customer demand, because consumer demand was getting completely out of control. I mean, games costing $500 million, $1 billion, pretty soon all you can ever do is Call of Duty number 27, and you can never do anything else because there's no way to ever make any money. And so the force multiplier of AI will, for at least a little while, create a lot of creativity, I think, where games can be made for a lot less money that are very creative but have high quality assets, and they'll actually be able to compete with other games for a while. And then I think, unfortunately, it'll degenerate again to very high budgets because people's expectations just keep going up. That's kind of the nature of it. But I think it is going to be both, to answer the question, unfortunately.
That's awesome. And I heard I heard a recent, I'm going to the programming, a recent opinion that programming jobs are going to be less about writing the software and things for themselves and writing code to train AI.
That's a very good point. And it's probably not. I'm going to come in as another person on this Google Meet. Sorry, you're going to have to let me in for my device.
No worries. And you are able to share your screen now, so
Yeah, I'll be
you're
able to
ready.
do my mobile device. I'll show you guys what it is. Let me join here. Let's see. Okay, hold on. Still.
All right, both of you are muted. Now, which one? Can't hear you yet. Nope, still can't hear you.
Okay.
There we go.
Great. So I'm going to because I'm going to mute myself here, and I'm going to try to add this as I'm going to jump in again, and I'm going to try to share my screen. So give me 1 second, because it's going to make otherwise it's going to make a horrible noise, as you just read.
All right.
It's pretty cool. Sorry for this.
No worries. We're looking forward to it.
It's fighting me now because it doesn't want to. Let's see. I guess I have to probably open a new context. Let's try that. There we go. Open. No, it's not letting me join now. I don't know why. So it's just opening Google Meet instead of going to the actual open Google Meet. You can't use this version of Meet app anymore.
Oh.
It's so I was like, let's just see here. Wow, is it really going to do that? Let me see. Let's try this again. I was able to get in there at least once, so it should be able to get me in as a customer.
Yeah, the new version's just called Meet.
Yeah.
Like I said at the outset of the call, this is the shared human frustration. No one has come in and figured out the UX of just meeting, of having seamless integration devices. It's amazing, but it seems like it would be like this on Zoom, Meets, Discord. No matter what.
Yeah. So the context for what I'm going to show you, I can do this while I'm trying to do this, is we're working on a game that's using kind of the technology we use for Blade Runner. And what it does is it allows us to, let's see. And now it's going to go. Okay. So let me just continue this list. What I'm going to show you is something running on an iPhone, if I'm actually able to ever get past all the pop-ups that it's trying to do. So we'll see if I can actually copy that link again this time and see what happens. I don't know if it's just because of the way the link is done, but it keeps opening. Join. Okay, there we go.
All right.
Okay, hold on. Let me see. Set as Solar.
I muted Lou's original stream.
Oh,
Okay.
cool. There we go.
But the mobile device is still quiet.
Yeah. Okay.
You still muted Lou on both devices. So I think if you can undo one, maybe the mobile one, maybe. But we can see your screen.
Yep.
But we can't hear you. Okay.
Oh, that looks awesome.
Wow.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Google crazy.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? Let's see here. That pin, we got the
How about now?
screen. Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Okay, so you can hear me. Okay. So
Perfect.
if you look on my phone on the screen where my face is, you'll see that it's actually super fast. It's super responsive. It's actually 8 milliseconds and it's 4K. But when you look up at the other screen, which is actually sharing what I'm looking at, what you're seeing is an Unreal Engine world and generative AI assets that were created. These companies were created using Gen AI. Literally just said pirate, and this little guy was created. The other one is called Anthony Gaudi. That's why he looks like a weird bear thing, because it didn't know what to do with that. And there's a little building that has the same samurai. There she is. Now we did have to animate and rig them because we didn't have that working yet, but we're almost there on that too. And what's cool about this is, let me go give you the other one. We'll go do the other test flight. You're able to actually build worlds that are as big or anything you would be able to do in Unreal, and be able to do it at high fidelity, at basically 120 frames a second, and just cool. So there you go.
How are you doing that on mobile? How are you running something like that?
Happy to explain. Let me see if I can kill the meat here. Nah. Okay. All right. So yeah. So the way sorry about that. I'm sorry. I just wanted to share that with guys because I mean, hey, why not share the cool toys?
That's
And
incredible.
we'll see that for a long time.
Yeah.
Okay. So the way we're able to do that on mobile, it's very simply, I know if you guys go research stuff called Gaussian splatting. And essentially the idea comes from, goes all the way back to Blade Runner, which is pre-compute everything you possibly can and store that as a pre-computed space, so that when you go to do the rendering, all you have to render, and by the way, that is a custom rendering engine. Our CTO used to run the graphics team for Blizzard for 15 years. So basically what it does is it takes all this pre-computed input. So all the stuff that we created with that Unreal world, it actually takes about, no joke, about 5 minutes to load that scene on my 4090 card. And actually when I run it, it runs barely at 40 frames a second, not even quite 60 frames a second. That's on my PC, but it's rendering everything in real time, right? So every frame. Instead, we compute all that stuff down and break it all down to only the visible space from where the camera is. And we store that as a bunch of geometric information as basically the geometry buffer. And then we take the geometry buffer, we load it into memory. And once it's loaded into memory, then we can render that geometry buffer. And because we create the geometry buffer from 360 degrees, you can look around 360 degrees and it renders incredibly fast, because it's basically only having to put one pixel on the screen at any given time with the shader. So you have no overdraw, which gives us lots of extra time to do things like composite the characters in the buildings, GUI and everything else. So using only 8 milliseconds, it gives us enough headroom for a 60 frame per second game. If we want that, probably will be 30, because it's more of an RTS kind of game. It's a strategy game. So it's a build and battle game. Think Animal Crossing Goes to War. That's kind of what we're doing.
Amazing. Is that custom rendering situation formed as basically a plugin you dropped into an Unreal development environment?
So the world itself can be created with any tool. So we've done this one, which I showed you, which happened to be Unreal. We have another one that we're doing for a music video as a demo for Apple Vision Pro, because this technology can also do the same quality 4K resolution in stereo, which is really kind of impressive. It looks like the sphere when you stick an Apple Vision Pro on. So that one was done in Blender. So it doesn't have to be Unreal Engine. What happens is that the 3D software that you created, whether it's Blender, Houdini, Unreal, what you do is you compute the space, but instead of rendering and the animations and everything else that's going on, whatever the background you want, it's like think of it as a really sophisticated skybox, because it can have animations and stuff like clouds or whatever. You build whatever you want, and then you compute all that geometry, and you store those as sequential geometry buffers or delta geometry buffers. And so you can pull those out of Blender or out of Houdini or Unreal, and then you end up with various channels. You end up with the albedo, the roughness, the metallic, your ambient occlusion, all these different channels, and then you actually have your light geometry as well as a Z buffer, so you can do all sorts of collision as well as occlusion. And so all this stuff is stored in memory, and then the thing that's doing the rendering in real time is basically just taking all that stuff and saying, oh, you're looking this way, let me pull these pieces out and throw them on the screen, instead of having to do all the culling and computation. That's something, or like all the real-time stuff that Nanite does. It's not dissimilar to Nanite, because it's doing all this computation, but unlike Nanite, it is pre-computed. It's not being done frame by frame.
Your characters, you were generative AI?
Yeah, they were generative AI, yeah, they were created with just a couple of prompts. The characters we create can look like just about anything. The size and the silhouette, we control those using what's called a LoRa. So we basically LoRa and inside the LoRa, which is a reduced set of the large data model, we inject a model. So the generative AI can modify the existing model by some amount of parameters, but it can't completely change it. And that keeps the character looking like a kind of Funko, big head, little body character.
So is that a publicly available tool, or is that a custom solution?
No, the tool that does that part of it is our part, but we're using open source models, and we're using other companies do the generative AI. We're not trying to get into the 2D generative AI space because it's just too busy. Plus, the open models are doing just a fine job. Those little characters look really good in the video. They look pretty bad in the actual, if you put them up as a 3D model, they look terrible. But because you're putting them in a world that has global illumination, full ambient occlusion, and has real-time shadows and lights, and has atmospheric fog, it has everything that Unreal can do. It actually happens to be our own engine doing it, but it has all those features. So even those relatively not very pretty looking models look pretty good.
As well. Now, I would be remiss if, as a leader in this game dev meetup,
I know. I just wanted to share, because you guys are all game makers, right? So it's like,
yeah, no, exactly.
Journey is not fun. You should see the fun stuff, right?
Yeah. No, and then I and Connor were game dev teachers. I work in Clark County School District. I'm in my classroom right now. So for your new company, are you looking for interns? Are you looking for employees some days?
Right now we're looking for money, but
okay.
Yeah, when we get to the point where we have our legs under us and everything, I'll definitely reach out, because I believe in the vibrancy and the energy that early in career people bring to a company. It's something that was wonderful about Westwood. We kind of lost it a few years into EA because we just didn't really have the ability to hire. We could do interns, but not quite the same. You kind of want people that are either in their last year or they're graduating soon, because I do believe you should finish your education. I taught classes at USC as well. That's one of the other things I did for a while in my life. A couple semesters of game development workshop. So adjunct professor there, and I did lectures at Carnegie Mellon, UCLA, and a bunch of other places. So
that's awesome.
Mostly Carnegie Mellon was about video compression, because I was the one who created the video compression, the core video compression we used that when we did Command and Conquer, so we could get full screen audio and video on a single speed CD-ROM. sort of 44 kilohertz um, bit stream to do full screen audio and video, which is just ridiculous. So
Amazing. Yeah, that's a big part of this meetup. And, Josiah teaches game development. I teach part-time at the Adelson School. We would love to have you come speak to the students in person or, set up an event.
Very happy to.
Oh, that's amazing. And we'd love to have you back here. I want to be respectful of your time. So I think we're going to wrap up now. This was so amazing, Louis. And just thank you so much. I'm sure we actually have more questions now that we've heard the full scope of it. So perhaps you'll join us again.
Absolutely. And by the way, anybody on the line, if you want, you can write me at my email. My personal email address, which I don't mind you having, obviously, is just my name, Louis Castle, LOUISCASTLE, at mac.com, Macintosh.com. Right. Mac. So if you have a question or something, send it to me. If you abuse it, then I'll just ignore you. But it's not a problem. Send me a question. I'm happy to answer it. It may be a little while before I get back to you, but I'll definitely get back to you.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Louis.
Take care, guys.
You too. And thank you all for who are here for
Out
attending.
there for Phil. There might be both. Can't tell. Take care, everybody.
Yes.